his time in office, Oklahoma City has invested nearly $2 billion, that's billion with a B, in dollars in schools and quality of life infrastructure through its MAPS program. MAPS stands for Metropolitan Area Projects, which is funded by a 1-cent local option sales tax. This investment has in turn generated nearly $6 billion in private sector investment. I want to recognize our local elected officials that are here. Commissioner Jim Hansen from the Ada County Highway District. Commissioner, raise your hand. Okay. Commissioner Kent Goldthorpe from the Ada County Highway District. Thank you, sir. Mayor Bob Henry from the City of Nampa. Mayor Nathan Lay from the City of Parma. And Council Member Ann Little Roberts from the City of Meridian. And have I missed any of other local elected officials? Sorry if I have. Anyway, a couple housekeeping items. Coffee and water are in the back by the door, to my right, to your left. Restrooms are out the back to the right and on your right. If you did not sign in, please do so before you leave. Sign-in forms are on the table by the door where Amy is, and she's raising her hand for you. Evaluation forms are on your chairs. Please fill them out. These are critical pieces of information to see whether we're bringing in the right speakers and hitting the topics that you are interested in. And leave them on the basket where Amy's at on your way out. Watch for emails and the Compass website for information on future presentations. And please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Mayor Cornett.
Thank you. And thank you for coming today. I'm encouraged and inspired and love telling Oklahoma City's story and our experiences. And the longer I'm here and the more I learn about Boise and the state of Idaho, it seems like there are more and more similarities with Oklahoma. Let me back up and just a little bit of kind of a history lesson on Oklahoma. Fairly new state. We were not made into a state until 1910, but kind of a western frontier. Kind of our earliest people in Oklahoma and Oklahoma City were a fairly desperate lot. You know, Oklahoma was kind of the last place to get on a land run and get free land and improve your life and hopefully your children's life. And so Oklahoma City's always had kind of this entrepreneur's mentality. We've also had a history of strong business leaders. There's one business leader in particular that I think is worth noting, just simply to show the power of one person and their ability to make big things happen. We had a Chamber of Commerce president named Stanley Draper, who served from like the 1920s up until 1970s. And Stanley Draper was involved in so many instrumental things. For instance, when the road building boom in the 1930s started, when Route 66 was being built to come through Oklahoma City, Stanley literally went out to the road crews that were constructing roads around the state and ensured that all roads led to Oklahoma City. He could see the future of transportation and how important it was going to be. So you look at a map now and you've got all these roads that kind of head toward the center of the state. In the 1940s, he heard that a visiting general was going to be at our airport. And just simply, they were putting gas in the plane. And this is like 1940 itself. And so Stanley went out there simply to shake the general's hand, to welcome him to Oklahoma City, to pay our regards in behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. And lo and behold, the general mentioned in passing that the nation really needed an Air Force base halfway between Washington and Los Angeles. And Stanley went back and started making some phone calls, and now Tinker Air Force Base is our largest employer, just because he was listening at the right time. In the 1960s, he realized that suburban municipalities were starting to encroach on our tax base, so he started annexing. And he didn't really know when to quit annexing. We wound up with a city of 620 square miles, but he appropriately annexed all the corridors of the interstate highways. And so now sales tax is collected from these places that are 20 miles away from the downtown core, but he protected our ability to continue to fund the city. He also was very futuristic with water, helping the city government build a large pipeline from southeast Oklahoma up to Oklahoma City that has created an incredible supply of water, and so that we have no water supplies for the rest of this century, no issues going forward. So many communities around the country, are concerned about water and clean air, And through a variety of futuristic and visionary leaders in Oklahoma, we took care of a lot of those amenities. However, despite all that leadership, Oklahoma had always had kind of this boom and bust mentality. My mother passed away this past spring, and in her last years, she had trouble remembering what she had for lunch. But the days of the Dust Bowl were very much on her mind. You asked her about the 1930s, and she would go into some story we'd never heard before. And it just showed this, this kind of cycle of desperation in Oklahoma City's history. And I think that's largely because we always had an economy that was tied to a commodity. Early on, it was the price of cotton, and then later the price of wheat, and then finally the price of oil and natural gas. But when you tie your economy to a commodity, your economy goes like this, because that's what the prices of commodities do. And so what it seems like in Oklahoma's history, we have difficulty ever having an average year. It seems like it's either really, really good or really, really struggling. And we were going through kind of those boom and bust periods throughout my childhood. In the 1970s, you'll remember the price of oil was going up. OPEC had started this cartel. There was this culture of belief that we were running out of oil and gas. The president was wearing a sweater around the White House, trying to conserve energy. And there was this, lack of supply. And of course, we're thinking in Oklahoma, well, this is good for us, because we've got a lot of oil and gas, and people spent money like it was going out of style. We assumed that that energy shortage would last forever. Oklahoma would be wealthy and beyond our wildest dreams. And then it all ended. It didn't end on one day, but it felt like it. On a July day in 1982, we had a bank, one of our shopping center banks. Shouldn't have been all that important of a bank, but it was, because it had a lot of energy loans. And it failed. The FDIC came in, shut it down. First bank closure in a long time in the United States. And by the end of the 80s, 200 banks had failed in the state of Oklahoma. You can imagine a state our size with 200 banks failing. And so by the end of the 80s, the oil and gas industry was crippled. The price of oil had dropped from $40 a barrel to about 10. So you can imagine how every deal was upside down. Our banking institutions were, in shambles. Most community banks had failed. And our commercial real estate business was almost non-existent. Almost every deal seemed like it was upside down. So in kind of the wake of this desperate time, the citizens of Oklahoma City elected a business-minded mayor named Ron Norick. Now, Ron Norick is perhaps the most important person in Oklahoma City's recent renaissance. Ron Norick came to office as a business leader who told the citizens he was going to create jobs. That's what we had to do. Now, Ron Norick's father was mayor, but it would be wrong to consider them some sort of political dynasty. They were business leaders. They had a printing business. And Ron never intended to get into politics, but when the mayor's job opened up, somebody approached him about it, he thought about it, it was something he wanted to do. And so he came to office with the idea of building an economy or creating jobs. And it's interesting to note that the first thing he did was try to put together incentive packages to put in front of corporate America. And so, lo and behold, United Airlines was putting together plans to build a large maintenance facility somewhere in the United States. This was a big one, like 5,000 to 7,000 employees, an annual economic impact of $1 billion to the community that could land this project. Well, Mayor Norick put his sights on it, focused in, spent over a year working on Oklahoma City's presentation. He went so far as to use our local option sales tax opportunity and pitch to the voters that if they would pass this sales tax, we would basically start building United Airlines facility, and then they would lease it back from us for a small amount. But it would be a way that we could creatively create an incentive for United Airlines to come to Oklahoma City, because we knew we were going to have to put a pretty big incentive on the table to get their attention. The governor then called a special session of the legislature, again, to sweeten the pot for this incentive package that we were trying to put together. And so by the end of the period, they had put $150 million on the table. The sales tax election passed, contingent on United choosing Oklahoma City. And of course, with that size money in 1990, you can imagine we got United's attention. And other cities just started dropping out, knowing that Oklahoma City was so intent on getting it. And a lot of economic development efforts are kind of behind the scenes. But this one was very public. It was on the front pages. It was on the news channels. You could sense there was a sense of optimism in the air because our incentive package was so impressive that there just didn't seem to be any way that United was going to be able to say no. And so on this fateful day, the finalists for this opportunity all gathered in Chicago to hear the results. And the CEO of United Airlines called a press conference and announced, we're going to build this facility in Indianapolis. And whatever air was left in Oklahoma was immediately expelled. Our business leaders, our political leaders had spent so much political capital on that. They were shaking their heads trying to figure it out. No one could seemingly explain what went wrong. And United Airlines didn't really want to talk about their process. You know, no hard feelings. You finished second. You should feel good about your effort. But you were they said we were the most honest, we were the most prepared. I mean, they said all these nice things like we were, great Boy Scouts, but we had not won this economic development opportunity. Well, Mayor Cornett did a couple of proactive things. First of all, he insisted that United tell us why we didn't get it, because we really didn't understand. And upon pushing and pushing, United finally came clean. Turns out they had sent to Oklahoma City some mid-level executives and their spouses, and they spent the weekend in Oklahoma City, and then they reported back to headquarters and reported to the board of directors what they had seen and found. And United came to the conclusion at the end of that kind of investigation that they just couldn't imagine their employees living there. And that was kind of the kick in the teeth that the mayor needed to hear. The quality of life in Oklahoma City had sunk so low that we could no longer buy the affection of corporate America. They were not interested in us at any price. Because to grow a company, you've got to attract a workforce. There had been a shift in economic development that Indianapolis had seen way before Oklahoma City. And that was that people were no longer moving to where jobs were. People were living where they wanted to live. And jobs were going to where the people lived. And so Mayor Cornett did a second proactive thing. He went to Indianapolis. Now, he did not move there. But at this stage of his political career, it probably seemed like a pretty good idea. Things were not going well at City Hall. Well, what he saw in Indianapolis was an urban core with some vitality. They had restaurants and hotels. There was a nightlife. There were sports arenas and sports teams. There were water features. Well, when we were honest about downtown Oklahoma City, it was flattered in a pancake. I mean, at 5 o'clock when the last worker went home, there was nothing going on in Oklahoma City. There was life in the suburbs, but life in the core of Oklahoma City had pretty much evaporated. We had become a suburb of nothing in Oklahoma City. And Mayor Cornett came back and scratched his head, talked to other business leaders, trying to figure out what to do next. And he came upon the idea. He took some confidence in the fact that the citizens had actually passed that sales tax. And so it seemed like the citizens were ready to invest in something, if the leadership would just give them something to believe in. And so he came up with an idea of building a series of quality of life improvements. And so he put together what we now know in Oklahoma City as MAPS, Metropolitan Area Projects. It was 9 projects that would be funded by a penny on the dollar sales tax. That sales tax would last for 5 years, and it would not be bonded out. So it would be pay as you go. So in other words, the money would be collected, and then the process of building the projects would begin, hiring the architects and the consultants and the engineers, and then ultimately the construction for the process. And as you can imagine, City Hall at this point didn't have a whole lot of political capital. Our city wasn't known for building anything grand, at least not in that generation. It was not known for being able to do things on time, or would they be good stewards with hundreds of millions of dollars of money. That was a big stretch to think that the city of Oklahoma City could actually do what they were announcing they intended to do. And so the sales pitch was difficult. And you could tell this was going to be a controversial vote. And almost in desperation at the end, when you could tell this election could go either way, Mayor Cornett kind of came clean to the voters. And with this kind of no-nonsense sales pitch at the end of the election. He said, look, even if no one ever comes to Oklahoma City to work or create a job, even if no one ever comes to Oklahoma City to visit and spend dollars as a tourist, the worst case scenario is we'll have a better city for us. We'll have a better city that might be able to keep our kids and our grandkids in Oklahoma City. We've got to invest in us before we can ever expect anyone from the outside to invest in us. And so with that kind of no-nonsense plea, they went to the polls and the citizens passed it with 53%. Interesting, though, that today you cannot find anyone who will admit they voted against it. Because ultimately it would change everything. Now, it's important to point out, I think, that it didn't change everything immediately. In fact, almost as soon as the election was over, sales tax wasn't meeting the expectation. The projects got a little behind budget. They got a little behind on time. And so, you know, there aren't many more things that can go worse. Revenue short expectations on the expenses or exceeding what they had hoped, and the schedule, the cash flow that Mayor Norrick had anticipated with this pay-as-you-go philosophy really wasn't all that realistic. It was kind of an untried way of funding at that point, and he was over anxious on how fast they could get the projects built, especially with the citizen oversight board that had been put in place. It was just a slow process. And so a year or year and a half after the maps vote, I'm pretty sure if the citizens could have voted again, they would have voted it back out. It was more controversial than it was positive. And in kind of the wake of that uneasiness, we're struck with the largest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. A bomb goes off downtown, 168 people are murdered, 9 o'clock on a weekday morning. And I think it's interesting to kind of take a snapshot of Oklahoma City at that particular point in our timeline. This was a generation of people that had already been through the economic collapse of the 80s. They'd been promised hope with United Airlines and had those hopes dashed. They'd been promised hope with MAPS, but here we were, you know, a year and a few months after that, and MAPS was anything but successful. And now they had this emotional burden of this mass murder placed on their shoulders. Not to mention just the physical need to rebuild that part of downtown after the explosion had damaged so many buildings and obliterated the Murrah Federal Building. And so kind of in the wake of that experience, something very almost magical happened in Oklahoma City. It's as if the citizens grabbed hands and pulled each other up and dared the world to pull us apart. The unity that emerged from those experiences is something that we still rely on, and to a certain extent today. Just as two people who have some sort of emotional experience in their history have that certain bond that no one from the outside can really understand, our city kind of went through that kind of emotional bonding that the people of the city thought was very special. So when that mayor retired, when Ron Norrick retired after 3 terms, the next mayor came in kind of this era of consensus building opportunities. And what this mayor saw was, well, we're making all these investments downtown. Downtown's being rebuilt. You can see the urban core starting to have a little bit of life. But he noticed that people weren't relocating to the inner city. And there was an assistant city manager that heard the mayor wondering about this, lack of repopulating the downtown area. And he said, Mayor, you can pave those streets with gold. But until we do something about the image of the school district, people aren't moving back to the inner city. And again, that was kind of the truth that the mayor needed to hear. Because yes, we were going to rebuild these capital projects downtown, but if we wanted people to move downtown, we were going to have to do something with our school buildings. And the sad truth about our schools was that it really wasn't the city's responsibility to have anything to do with the school system. That was kind of a separate funding, a separate board. But the Board of Education had kind of bankrupted its reputation. They couldn't pass a bond issue. And the deferred maintenance was piling up and up. And the education going on inside the school buildings wasn't very good either. But regardless of your opinion on the education level, you couldn't deny that the buildings were falling apart. And so he put together this kind of funding mechanism citywide that spread capital dollars over the entire city to the suburban districts that were inside the city limits, but most of the money went to that one urban district that had the most need. And he put together a $700 million package to rebuild or refurbish every school building in the district. All 75 buildings were either built new or were refurbished. An entire round of capital, a new bus system, a new technology, but mostly updated buildings. That election passed at 62%. And the school district was able to pass a bond issue at that same time period because of the kind of new interest of the business community in the school district's problems. And more money was actually put into the district at the time. And lo and behold, with those seeds planted, with Mayor Norrick's vision of rebuilding and creating tourism opportunities in downtown, and Mayor Humphrey's ability to rebuild the school system, you could start to feel that Oklahoma City was creating something really special. The projects that were in MAPS weren't extraordinary individually. They were just extraordinary as a package. It was a new baseball stadium for our AAA team. It was a new sports arena that was going to be built to NBA and NHL specifications, although it was a distant dream that any NHL or NBA team would want to locate in Oklahoma City at that time. We had an old abandoned warehouse district, and with MAPS we built a San Antonio-style canal that would take boats through this old warehouse district. That really took some vision. We built a new library downtown. We made some investments in our Performing Arts Center, made some investments at the fairgrounds. Mayor Norrick even had the vision to put water in the river, which, if you've ever seen Oklahoma's river and know the history, you know what an extraordinary feat that was. Not of engineering, but of ingenuity. You see, we had this big ditch downtown that the grown-ups called the river. And I can remember as a child growing up and seeing, real rivers in my geography books and wondering why ours didn't have any water unless it rained the night before. And as it turned out, the river had flooded in the 1920s, and the leadership went to the Corps of Engineers and asked for help. Well, they got it. The water never flooded again, but we never saw it again. They had diverted it out successfully, and Oklahoma City was left with this extremely large ditch right through the middle of downtown. The city of Oklahoma City actually had a line item in its budget to mow the river twice a year. That's how bad it was. So Mayor Norrick's vision in MAPS was to build low water dams and impound water. And so, yeah, we still wouldn't have a river with water flowing through it like most cities in the world, but at least we'd have water and we wouldn't have this dry ditch that we had to mow. And so the dams were constructed, the other projects were built, the schools were improved. And in 2004, there was kind of this rare collective lack of judgment amongst the voters, and they elected me to be the next mayor. And so this city that I intend to lead was just starting to kind of emerge as a city worth noticing. And you could kind of sense, if you used your imagination, that Oklahoma City might be in the era of something special. Not a whole lot was happening from the private sector yet, but there was talk about it. Everybody wanted somebody else to go first. No one wants to be the first person to invest a lot of money in downtown Oklahoma City. They're trying to see how real this this generation and this economy is going to be. Well, as kind of all this is taking place, what I noted as becoming mayor is we started showing up on the lists. Now, the lists that I'm referring to are magazines and websites that love to rank cities. They always, how can you not look where your city is located whenever there's a list that's out? And what I noticed was that we were starting to show up on these lists. It'd be like best place to get a job or best place to start a business, and we'd be like number 23 or something like that. But we were on a list. We'd never been on a list before. and so I'm using this to validate the city's history and our investments in ourselves, and show the fact that we're now we're competing. We're in conversations with these other peer cities, and I'm trying to get the business community to realize that they need to be investing. Now people from the outside are starting to notice what we've done. I still don't know that we believed it internally, that our economy was about to continue to on its upward trajectory. And long about the time these lists were coming out and I was sharing them with our community, and really, I think by just talking so much about the list, I was giving validity to the list. And then Men's Health magazine comes out with this list of the most obese cities in the country. Gulp. And there we are. I think we were number 2 or number 3 that year, the most obese cities in the country. Well, yeah, I like to point out we were on that list with a lot of really cool places. Dallas, Houston, Memphis, Miami, Atlanta. I mean, those aren't cities that generally you're embarrassed to be associated with. But how do you defend being on the list of the most obese cities in the country? And here I was, used to trying to get the media to interview me about all these lists. Well, they were there. They were wanting to know what I was going to do about this obesity list. And of course, I had no idea. But it was a wake-up call for me, personally and professionally. Personally, because about that time I got on the scales and realized that I'd been gaining weight. And I remember going to this government website, and I typed in my height. I think I cheated about a ½ inch, but nonetheless, I typed in my height, and then I typed in my weight, which at that time was 220 pounds, and I hit enter, and it came back and said obese. I remember thinking, what a stupid website. I'm not obese. I'd know if I was obese. But then it kind of forced me to get honest with myself, and I realized I'd gone through this, kind of period in my life where I'd been gaining about 2 or 3 pounds a year, and then about every 10 years I'd take off 20 or 30 pounds, and then I'd kind of repeat the cycle. And as a result, I had this closet full of clothes I couldn't wear. Only I knew which third of the closet was appropriate for whichever weight that I was at that moment. But it all seemed so normal. And as I'm going through this and determining to lose weight, I stopped eating as much, and so my weight starts coming off. And I start looking at our city with, trying to figure out why the culture of our community seemed to lend itself to obesity. I realized that we built a pretty good quality of life if you were a car. But if you were a person, you were seemingly combating the automobile at every turn. If we built a school or a church or almost any entity, it seemed like the most dominant architectural feature was the drop-off for automobiles. We built neighborhoods with no sidewalks. We built shopping areas, but really no walkability between those and the surrounding neighborhoods. We built schools, but it appeared that we intended every kid to be dropped off by a car. And you do this over and over again, and I suspect we had the least pedestrian-friendly community in the United States. We had inspired our civil engineers, I think that it was their main task to see how fast they could get a car from here to here. And they were really good at it. I mean, traffic was flowing in Oklahoma City. Virtually no traffic congestion to speak of. But the bottom line was we were spending all our time in our cars. Somebody did the math, I have no idea who, but said we were the fast food capital of the world. We had more fast food restaurants per capita than any city in the world. And I don't doubt it, but when you're there, you just kind of assume it's normal. One time I was talking to the CEO of Taco Bell, and I mentioned that I'd heard we were the fast food capital of the world. And he said, well, that explains it. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, just a minute. And I could hear him typing on his computer. And he said, it explains why we have 45 Taco Bells in Oklahoma City. I said, you have 45? I mean, who counts their Taco Bells? I had no idea. I said, well, how many people go to Taco Bell every day? He goes, well, just a minute. And I hear him typing, and he comes back and goes, 35,000. Oh my gosh. And so I realized it's unlikely I'm going to change that. But I did start talking about making better choices. And even though you've decided to go to a fast food restaurant, there are still better choices than other choices. And so we put on this awareness campaign trying to take on obesity. I put the entire city on a diet. We pledged to lose 1 million pounds, really more of an awareness campaign to draw attention to this issue. But along the way, I realized that by drawing attention to this problem, the sales tax option to start rebuilding the built environment. And very few cities, can alter their built environment because it's so expensive. But what we did with MAPS 3 and also with a bond issue that we passed at the same time and a little help from a TIF, from a building that was being constructed is we redesigned all of the downtown streets. We took the one-way streets, we made them two-way, we narrowed the capacity, we highly landscaped them. We were trying to create a place, make downtown into not a thoroughfare, but a feeling where the pedestrian felt welcome. And so to try and encourage people to spend time downtown as opposed to seeing how fast they could get out of downtown. We also put on a really aggressive process of building sidewalks. And we have the funding now for 400 miles of sidewalks throughout the city, almost every corridor and sometimes in neighborhood areas. We're completing our bicycle trail master plan with MAPS 3. We had this incredible bicycle master plan, but absolutely no funding was being dedicated to it. But with MAPS 3 and this dedicated penny on the dollar sales tax, we completely funded the bicycle trail master plan. We've completed the first trail, the second trail is in design, and the third trail will be awaiting and being constructed when that one's through. We're building senior wellness centers throughout the community. So we have 4 of those. They're really, think of it, your typical YMCA, but a little bit larger than that. These have aquatic features in them for rehabilitation. What we're trying to do is get ahead of this demographic angle that shows that the baby boom generation is probably going to live a long time, and if you don't invest on the wellness side, you're likely to have a lot of very sick old people in your community. And we're trying to really push this pedestrian-friendly walkability, raise the expectation of health in the community by putting these wellness centers around. On the river that didn't have any water, the philanthropist invested in incredible boathouses, and the city with MAPS 3 built what's called a whitewater facility. Now, we don't have mountains in Oklahoma, so if we're going to go whitewater rafting, we have to get very creative. And so we created a man-made whitewater facility that will open in April, and we're hosting the Olympic trials for the sport of canoe, kayak, and rowing here in 2016, and alongside the river that didn't have any water in it. Again, taking advantage of the initial maps and the philanthropy that had followed, and now investing as a city once again. We're also building a new convention center, and we're also building a downtown streetcar. I'm not sure that many cities have funded a downtown streetcar and paid cash, but we are. And in fact, as you know, the federal government sometimes has money to help you construct transportation projects, but you have to have some sort of match. Well, because we're able to accumulate so much cash with MAPS, we have cash to help get a tiger grant. And so we had budgeted $13 million, I believe, for our multimodal hub, and now the budget's going to be $30 million, which will really allow us to do it right, and also make sure that all of our modes are hooked into one central location in downtown Oklahoma City. And so, summing all this up, I don't know that there's a city in the country that's come as far as fast as Oklahoma City. It's not that the quality of life in Oklahoma City is better than it is here in this community, but you don't know how bad it was in the early 1990s. Some of the things I've noticed now looking back, I graduated in the mid-70s from kind of the large, successful suburban high school of its day. It seems like in every community there's always one high school that seems to be outperforming the others, and it kind of moves around in different parts of the city in different eras. Well, in my era, I was attending this school that was winning more than its share of academic awards, more than its share of athletic state championships. And I remember on graduation day, there were about 60 kids in this class of 960 that got to wear the orange robe. Now, if you wore the orange robe, that meant that you had a grade point average of above 4 points for your 4 years. Pretty extraordinary. You can probably guess I wasn't wearing an orange robe. But the point is that when I think back of those 60 kids, I think about 58 of them are gone. I think I can pick out about 2 people from that group of people that are in Oklahoma City today. And when you think it through, it kind of makes sense. Those are the kids that went on to get advanced degrees. They came of age in the 1980s. Well, there were no jobs for people with that educational attainment in Oklahoma City, and so they left. The result of that is we lost a generation of leadership in Oklahoma City. There may be no more valuable commodity in your community than a generation of young people that are highly educated, and we lost them. One of the results of that sinking economy and allowing our quality of life to turn as deep as it had. I also should point out that Oklahoma and Oklahoma City is a very conservative place. And that's one of the similarities I've seen, in Idaho and Boise, seeing the vast number of Republicans that represent the state legislature, kind of this overriding concern about taxation in general. Well, Oklahoma shares all of that. It's a very tough environment to pass any sort of sales tax initiative. But our citizens, kind of through the years, seem to have determined the type of government they're willing to consider funding and the type of government they're not all that fired up about. And it seems like through looking at this series of elections, it seems what they like is they like capital projects. They like funding something that they can go up and touch at the end. And when you think about it, government's pretty good at building stuff. Government's not good at a lot of things, but government can build things, pretty well. They also seem to like the fact that with our MAPS campaigns, it's sunset. So our first MAPS initiative was 5 years, and then it went away. And then we had a 7-year MAPS for the schools. Well, I didn't mention, but we had a 15-month sales tax to improve our sports arena one more time to get the Seattle Sonics to move to Oklahoma City. So we became an NBA city, but we needed a 15-month tax extension to get the arena up to NBA standard. And then MAPS 3 is 7 years and 9 months. The citizens seem to have, they seem to like the fact that they're going to have, this tax is not going to be permanent. Mayor Norrie, when he selected 5 years for that original MAPS, I asked him one time, how'd you come up with that number? And he said, well, that was about the length of time people used to borrow money to pay for a car. So I was thinking to myself, they borrowed money for 5 years. They'll probably understand that this doesn't seem like forever. And that kind of makes sense when you're trying to deal with people and their emotions. And a lot of times elections are about more emotion than they are intellect. There's a sense to that. We have also, on the MAPS projects, not bonded it out. So we paid cash for all those. And our community kind of likes the fact, and they take pride in the fact, that we're not creating more debt for ourselves by going through this. Now, it does take a lot longer to build the projects that way. If you bond it out, you can start the construction immediately and things happen much faster. In Oklahoma City, it takes us longer to build these projects. We've also put citizen subcommittees and citizen advisory boards overseeing the construction. The elected officials have the final say, of course, but by the time the consultants get through with it and the citizen advisory boards, over 99% of what has come to the council gets approved. And so there's this real buy-in, the idea that this is a citizen-led initiative. By now, as you can guess, in my 4th term, I've run a lot of elections. I have found myself on the ballot numerous times, and just as many times I've been pushing some initiative to what I think will better the community, whether it's for the school district, or it's our bond issue, or it's one of the MAPS campaigns. And so I found myself, as I kind of looked back over that series of elections, I remembered this one theme that seems to percolate every time. What happens is I'll find myself in some distant neighborhood meeting, some suburban neighborhood meeting 10, 12 miles from the urban core. And with all the enthusiasm I can muster, I'm talking about myself as a candidate, or I'm talking about some initiative. And you can see that, a lot of people are buying into it, but not everybody's buying into it. And inevitably, I'll find myself going nose to nose with someone in the room who I can tell pretty quickly doesn't like downtown, they don't like taxes, and they don't like me. And when I've lost the intellectual argument, when I've used all the bullet points that I have at my disposal, I'll close with this. I say, well, we're creating a city where your kid and your grandkid are going to choose to live. Oh, they hate that argument because they know it's true. If you were in Oklahoma City in the 1980s, if it didn't happen in your house, it happened in your cousin's house or your neighbor's house, young people who left. Not because they wanted to, but because there just weren't jobs. And today, they're in Boise, or they're in Dallas, or they're in Houston or Tokyo, but the vast majority are not in Oklahoma City. And I think the real sociological virtue of what Oklahoma City has done is that there's a sense now that young people that grow up in Oklahoma City want to live there. They aren't waiting to see how fast they can leave. And yes, they go off to school, and a lot of times we encourage them to do that. But there's this sense that they'll want to come back. And that may be the most powerful argument we have when you're speaking to an electorate. Because they don't like to pay taxes, they don't like some level of government, and they might be blaming you for it in a misdirected fashion. But they care about their kids and they care about their grandkids. And what we learned with Mayor Norrie 30 years ago was that the secret to economic development was really the quality of life in your community. It wasn't about how many incentive dollars you could put on the table. And that's our story. I'll take questions if anybody has any. Yes?
Who is your biggest employer?
Who is our biggest employer? A little bit complicated because the largest employee base is really the aviation industry around Tinker Air Force Base. So that's public and private sector kind of combined. Boeing has a very large contingent there. Boeing shut down its plant in Long Beach, moved those jobs to Oklahoma City. They shut down their Wichita operation, moved those jobs to Oklahoma City. And they've closed a Seattle operation and moved those jobs to Oklahoma City. And so they're hiring every engineer they can find in Oklahoma City right now. The largest industry we have is still oil and gas, although we've diversified enough that it's only about 3% of our workforce is directly related to the oil and gas industry. We've invested in biotechnology. We have a lot of medical research with our state medical school that takes place, so a lot of research is going on in Oklahoma City. And with maps, we have a tourism industry that we didn't have before. And so that old warehouse district where we built the canal now gets over 1 million visitors a year. And before, nobody was there on purpose. I mean, if you were there, you were lost. Downtown Oklahoma City has people. I mean, if you lived in downtown Oklahoma City in the 90s, you were probably in jail. There wasn't a lot of people who were living down there on their own. Today, I live in downtown, and so do thousands of other people, and there's thousands of new units being constructed. The private sector reaction to the MAPS investment is about $6 billion that has been coming into our community. How many people here had to read The Grapes of Wrath when they were in school? Almost every hand went up. See, that surprises me when I travel and I ask, because I grew up thinking that was something we did to our children to ensure they'd feel bad about themselves. Because what's that story about, right? It's about a very poor Oklahoma family in that Dust Bowl era that my mother grew up. And of course, there is just no hope for them in Oklahoma. And so they put everything they have in a truck and they leave for California. Well, what a great message to send the children of Oklahoma. This is how you find your way in life. You get on a truck and you find Route 66 and you get out of here as fast as you can. And we have no traffic congestion, so you'll be able to get out of town really quickly. Well, I think it's interesting today to note with the Census Bureau's assistance, the relocations that are going on in Oklahoma. It appears what we're going through now is the wrath of grapes. The grandchildren of that generation that went to California are coming back to Oklahoma. More people relocating from California to Oklahoma than are going the other way. More people from Texas are moving to Oklahoma and Oklahoma City that are going the other way. Apple told me the other day, the computer software company, told me that we have 2,200 people in the state of Oklahoma, most in Oklahoma City, that are doing nothing but designing apps for your phone. And again, that's an industry you can't really count if you're the mayor. But Apple knows, because those people have to register to be able to create those applications. And of course, these people are mostly entrepreneurial. And if you pay 99 cents for that app, they're getting the money. But that shows you, I mean, that type of a person can live anywhere in the world. You don't have to live in New York City or Beijing to be involved in designing an app. You can live anywhere. Well, the fact that so many have chosen to live in Oklahoma City shows that we've created a quality of life those highly educated 20-somethings are looking for. And some of it was on purpose, some of it was by accident, but all of it is kind of based on that philosophy that Mayor Norrick stumbled into after failing to impress corporate America with incentive dollars and realizing that we had to invest in us. And that penny in the dollar sales tax that we've used time and time again now has been critical to our success. It's hard to imagine that we would have done anything of this nature without it. Well, I'll just stop there. Yeah, go ahead.
Mayor, population and employment of Oklahoma City, and what was your total tax before you started that?
Yeah, our population today is 640,000 in the city limits. Metro area is about 1.3 million. We've been growing at about twice our traditional trajectory. So it's not crazy growth like Austin or Phoenix or Las Vegas. But we used to grow at slightly less than 1%. Now we're about 1.5% growth per year. So there's like 9,000 people moving to Oklahoma City. No, 900 moving in a month per month coming into Oklahoma City. Our tax rate, our sales tax rate is 8.375, with that 1 penny being temporary. It's scheduled to go off the rolls at the end of 2017. And what was your last question? Okay. In Oklahoma, our property taxes are really low. We have an income tax of about 4 to 5%, and our sales tax is a little higher than most of the places. Our community seems to prefer sales tax to property tax. It kind of seems a little bit discretionary. You don't have to buy something if you don't want to. And so they're more likely to pass a sales tax extension or addition than they are to put a property tax on their home. They just don't like property taxes at all. And our housing prices are really low.
Idaho, you probably know this, but Idaho, for instance, to pass school bonds requires a 2/3 supermajority. And whenever these discussions about local option tax come up, that's always tied, it seems to me to be tied to the discussion. Could these maps, different versions of maps passed had you had a supermajority?
Well, we didn't get a supermajority. In Oklahoma, a bond issue for schools has to have 60, but the rest all just have to have 50. So our threshold is much lower. But keep in mind, those funding the campaign were only trying to get to 50. And so perhaps if the business community had raised more money and run a larger campaign, the number could have been over 60 or higher. That's hard to say, but that's kind of at the end of the day, it's politics. It's trying to get people to go to the polls and vote yes. I will say, though, that it's not hard to get somebody to vote no when you're talking about tax. To get somebody to vote yes, you got to convince them. To get them to vote no, you just kind of have to poke a hole in it and talk about some hidden agenda or some unknown person getting rich behind the scenes. Or my favorite is, if you vote no this time, they'll come back with something else that you really like. Which, like these are put together on the back of a napkin every 2 weeks and then kind of bring them back out before the voters. I mean, these are all one-time deals. And we've been fortunate to pass them, but we haven't passed them easily. Even with the track record and even with the brand of MAPS being as strong as it is, they're tough to pass, especially if you have a funded opponent. Yes?
So you have to go back to the voters every time you initiate a new map?
That's right. That's right. Uh-huh.
Can you speak to some of the successes you've had in attracting new business since
Yeah.
you've improved?
Yeah, well, we have. Boeing is one example that I mentioned. Dell Computers has come in and created a couple of thousand tech jobs. Oklahoma had this history in the 20th century of we would grow an energy company in a medium-sized city, and then at some point it would get large enough where it went to Dallas or Houston. Halliburton is an Oklahoma company originally. It's now in Dallas and Houston. You got Phillips and Conoco. I mean, these are Citgo. These are all Oklahoma-originated companies that aren't really in Oklahoma anymore. They might have a presence there, but largely their corporate headquarters are other places. So it was fulfilling to me when about 4 years ago, the same thing started to happen with Continental Resources in the town of Enid. So it grew to a point where I think it felt we're not going to be able to attract the top talent to grow this company the way we want to in Enid, and so we're going to have to leave. And so they, were courted by the same list of cities, and they chose Oklahoma City as where to locate. And this is a company of tremendous size. It's one of the largest energy companies in the country. Harold Hamm, one of the richest men in the United States, owns most of the stock. He lives in Oklahoma City. But I think the rest of the state of Oklahoma should realize that finally our state had a municipality, had a region that could keep a corporate Oklahoma entity in town, and they didn't feel like they were forced to leave, for another place. And so Continental Resources is another one. Our other headquarters that have grown, we have Hobby Lobby. Is a private company that's based there. They have a chain of retail stores, as you know. Love's Travel Stops. Love's has travel stops. If you travel much on the road, you see Love's all over the country. Love's is also, because of their travel stops, they're the largest franchisee holder of Subway's sandwiches, because they have so many of those. So I don't know how many they own. Over 100, I think, of those. Sonic Drive-Ins is headquartered in Oklahoma City. In fact, it's in the middle of our entertainment district in Bricktown. I think what we've largely done, it's hard to get corporate headquarters to move, but we've had the ability to get a larger presence of large companies to grow whatever they were doing in Oklahoma City. So if they had 10 people in Oklahoma City, now they probably have 25. And so all those companies have just expanded. Our unemployment rate is 3.3. It's one of the lowest in the country, and that's with $31 oil, when generally Oklahoma has traditionally struggled economically. It appears this time with low oil prices that we've diversified enough where we can, we'll make it through without suffering, long-term negative effects. The low energy prices is affecting our state government significantly, but it doesn't seem to be having the same effect on Oklahoma City. Yes?
So we've talked an awful lot about the private sector. What about the public sector? About how many employees are employed by Oklahoma City, and what sort of departments or specializations do you offer for your citizens?
We have 4,200 employees, about 1,000 police officers, about 1,000 firefighters. We offer the same services that every other municipality would. We do outsource our solid waste and our garbage pickup to Waste Management, and we outsource the operations of our convention center and sports arena to SMG, which is another national company. But for most other, so our water is done by Veolia, our wastewater, but most of it is done by the Oklahoma City. Yes?
How big are the suburban cities around Oklahoma City, and what role do they have? Do they support or resent the maps? Do you have plans?
That's a great question, because our tax is just the city limits.
Right.
And we're about half of the metro area.
Right.
But to answer your question, Norman has about 100,000, where the University of Oklahoma is located. That's half hour to the south. Edmond is about 90,000. It's to the north, another university affluent suburb. Those communities have done their own sales tax option efforts. Typically, though, it's for public safety, to build a new jail, or to add police officers. They'll put in a permanent tax. They haven't done any broad quality of life like initiatives the way Oklahoma City has. Most municipalities in the state of Oklahoma have taken a local option to their voters. Some of them are permanent taxes, some of them are temporary, but most of them are ultimately about public safety, because at some point it's hard to hire enough police officers or firefighters or run your corrections facility in the county, and so that's usually where they wind up. Sometimes you'll see somebody emulating Oklahoma City and doing the quality of life, and they have mixed results. What I think it's important to remember is that if there's a concern that if this option is given to municipalities and counties, that a lot of bad ideas will go into place. It's hard to pass good ideas, much less one that isn't well thought out and justified and popular. So I wouldn't be concerned about somebody's hair-raising scheme about doing something crazy. The voters will see through that. I mean, these things are difficult to pass with the best of intentions and the best of support information available.
But you haven't passed anywhere 2 or 3 have come together and will covering multiple municipalities.
No, we've never put up maps on top of each other. We do have some permanent taxation though in place. We have a 3/4 cent public safety sales tax that was passed in the 1980s, and we have an 1/8 of a penny permanent tax that's dedicated to our zoo that again was passed in the 1980s by some people who took that on and passed it in short order. And we have a great zoo as a result. I mean, if you have a dedicated funding, my answer when people say you have a great zoo, I said, well, we better, because we have a lot of things that they can't find funding for. The zoo is sitting there with about 12, 15 million a year of sales tax money dedicated every year. They get it, and then they charge admission. They have a $20 million budget, and so it's the citizens, whether they realized it or not, were dedicating themselves to having a good zoo. That's part of the quality of life of Oklahoma City. That was their choice, and they passed it. Yes.
So internet sales tax here in Idaho, it's estimated we lose about 30 to 50 million a year in internet sales taxes that aren't collected. Does Oklahoma have that as well? Have you seen, when you're talking about sales taxes in the future and the growth of e-commerce, is that an issue?
Yes, it is. We're very active in fighting that issue in Washington. It costs Oklahoma City about $20 million a year. Cost the state, a proportionate amount. But as you know, and you stated, those taxes are due. We just don't have the ability to collect them, and so we're urging Congress to act just like you are. It's significant. A police officer or a firefighter costs us about $100,000 a year. By the time you uniform them and pay their salary, and so if you're talking 20, that's 200 police officers. That if we chose to spend the money that way, that's what we could have. I think that's one way to kind of break it down for citizens or legislators in Washington. Most of our money goes to public safety. 2/3 of our general fund budget is spent on public safety, and it's being stunted by the growth of internet sales and our inability to collect the taxes that are due. Yes.
Do you have a MAPS project that maybe didn't work out as planned, and what did you learn from that?
We have not failed in any of those elections, but others municipalities have. Here's one way that we've done it. We have focused our attention on the core of the city with the idea that people care about their neighborhood and their downtown. And so the idea is that people buy into that downtown's important to them. We have successfully convinced the suburbanites who have to vote on this that their quality of life is directly related to the intensity of downtown. That suburb of nothing philosophy is not going to be allowed to continue. There are other municipalities in the state of Oklahoma that have tried to divvy up the projects to different suburban communities and try to give everybody something. And they have struggled to create the type of downtown vitality that we have. And in an effort to try and pass and get support in all these different neighborhoods, they've really, I think, whittled down the the collective force that it could be. I'm trying to think of we learn political lessons every time about how to pass things, and of course an election in 2009, which our MAPS 3 project, wouldn't be an election today. I mean, with social media changing the way that things are marketed, an election today would be much different than those. But what we try to do is have an economic development angle on every project. What we learned, though, was that our definition of economic development has changed. And so we now consider a quality of life investment an economic development tool. I consider sidewalks an economic development tool. In 1993, that message would have felt odd and misplaced. No one would have bought into it. But we kind of evolved.
Streetcar, what would you summarize your campaign, your arguments for that, and your funding for it, operations as well as initial capital?
Yeah, we have because urban sprawl has really had its effect on making kind of an inefficient lack of density environment in Oklahoma. Public transit's never something we did well. We went through the process about 10 years ago of doing a fixed guideway study, which is, some of you in the room will know, it's kind of a blueprint for a 21st century public transit system if you had all the money you needed. And it would include bus rapid transit, a better bus system, and perhaps some commuter rail. Ours consists of all that. One element of that was a downtown streetcar circular system, with the idea that if you have a commuter rail system coming into Oklahoma City, you've arrived in the city without transportation, and you need some sort of circulator to get around. We also believe that there's additional investment along the streetcar lines, and so there'll be economic development generated by having a streetcar. It also seems to be one of the favorite objects of those highly educated 20-somethings that we're trying to attract. It's almost like they have a checklist. You know, they're looking for cities that have some sort of rail-based transportation, or at least plans to do something in that area. It's kind of it seems progressive. One thing that's interesting, and I don't know of another city that's done this, we passed, the whole thing passed as one package, but we basically passed a streetcar initiative without routing it. In other words, we told people we were going to have a downtown streetcar, but we didn't route it. And my thinking was that routing it politicizes it, because then it's going to appear that you're favoring these people, and sure enough, just these people will want to be on the line and these people won't, and there'll be this huge, negativity created. Well, negativity will beat one of these initiatives. And so we promised a streetcar, but we did not route it until after the vote. And it kind of goes, it's on the route that people would have suspected. It wasn't like the ultimate route was, what people wouldn't have predicted anyway. And the fixed guideway study had a, kind of a basic route. It's similar to that. But I think, nationally, when I bring up the fact that, because I've seen the politicizing that goes with routing a streetcar, and I didn't want that to get involved in our campaign. Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go with the chamber to tour your city, and when we were there, it was just before you were starting to convert one-way streets to two-way streets. And can you elaborate on the success of that, and what have you learned from that, and have you seen any revitalization as far as retail and activity street level?
Yeah, her question is about going one-way streets to two-way streets, because we had virtually all one-way, and now we have virtually all two-way. A couple of thoughts on that. First of all, I'm not an engineer. In fact, whatever the opposite of being an engineer is, that's me. And so when they were trying to explain to me that it would be better to go one-way to two-way streets, I was thinking, okay, I get it, and I'm thinking that's got to take a couple of months to turn all those streets. A year and a half later, I mean, all I need to do is put in a few street signs and restripe the roads. Oh no! I mean, it was an incredibly intensive process. And here's a few things I noted. First of all, it slowed down traffic speeds a little bit. It decreases it increases the amount of time it takes to move through the city. So again, it captures that sense of place. We want Oklahoma City to be a destination. We don't want it to be a thoroughfare. And two-way streets help with that. By slowing down traffic, that helps try to create the pedestrian friendliness of it. The other thing I'll say is that by now driving on streets, the wrong way, you're going on streets that you hadn't been in that direction, you see the city in an entirely different place. I mean, when they first put in the one-way streets, it was like I never noticed things before, because you're seeing buildings from going a different direction. So the engineering of it was more complicated than I suspected it would be. It took longer than I thought it would be. But I have not had one citizen come up to me and say, I really miss those one-way streets. Not one has come up to me and said. Yes?
When you were revitalizing the warehouse district, did you mainly use the local option sales tax, or did you tap into like brownfields funding, other funding opportunities?
Yeah, her question is, when we created what's called Bricktown, what was the city's involvement helping to create that? Obviously, going from a brick warehouse district to an entertainment district doesn't happen easily. If you look at it, from the perspective of looking back over the 20 years that we invested, the city really did two major things. We created two anchors. We built the baseball stadium and put it there, and we built the canal and put it there. And pretty much after that, the private sector reacted. Now, to boost the private sector, we incentivized a Bass Pro retail store to go in. And that was really our first venture into subsidizing a retail investment. Highly controversial. Obviously, you're getting involved in the marketplace there, where I didn't feel comfortable, stepping my toe in, and of course our business leaders were all uncomfortable. But we felt like we had to do something to get retail going in Bricktown. So we did it, and it did kickstart development. So after that, a large movie theater came in, Sonic moved their corporate headquarters into Bricktown. It did what we hoped it would do. But we tread very lightly on subsidizing retail in general. And that was kind of the last time we were involved in that. Now, I'll still have citizens come up to me with, who have some negativity on their mind, and their sense is that all I care about is Bricktown. It's interesting for them to understand that since I've been mayor, we've done nothing for Bricktown. All of those other things were put in before I was mayor. Bricktown has taken off, and they just assume that I'm helping Bricktown. I moved into Bricktown, but we haven't done anything from a city perspective on Bricktown. It has been, the private sector has generated everything that takes place. A lot of people build businesses, a lot of people go broke, a lot of people overpaid for property. I mean, there's all sorts of private sector evaluations that can be made on Bricktown. But at the end of the day, 1 million people go there. And it's given us, kind of some life after an NBA game or after a baseball game, or people from out of town that want to see Oklahoma City. That's generally where they go. And even though our citizens may, in that distant suburb that don't like downtown, all that stuff, they don't like taxes, they don't like me, and all those things. When someone comes in from out of town, the first place they take them is Bricktown, because it's kind of unique and it's kind of different. And you can walk the canal and go out to dinner or go to a baseball game or play laser tag or go to a movie, or you can do things in kind of a destination places. In my day we'd have gone to the mall, I guess. And now people come to Bricktown. Yeah, in the back.
Really in western cities we still segregate land uses, and so I just heard Mayor Henry where NAMP is looking at making an area residential versus we're still getting some of this, even within cities, the concept of mixed use and getting a vibrant area going. Can you talk about maybe the evolution of Oklahoma City?
Yeah,
when it became that we're a city, and that that's okay to have housing
we traditionally, the city I grew up in was very development friendly. In other words, we didn't require much. We had low standards, and we developed it. Our standards have risen quite a bit, and so we have a lot of form-based codes in place. Our planning department's really busy. We have business improvement districts. We have urban design commissions. So we have historical preservation efforts. So there's a lot of red tape to kind of protect the quality of investment that goes into these urban areas where we've invested. We haven't had a whole lot of pushback from the private sector. I mean, what I tell, one of the things you do as mayor, and it's one of the few, large responsibilities that's given to the mayor constitutionally in our city, is boards and commissions. And I have never told anybody on my board or commission how to vote on anything. But what I do ask them, when they ask for advice or I just feel like I want to give it, I'll say, from time to time, try and raise the standards of whatever it is you're overseeing. If you're doing the plumbing codes, if you're doing some design board, doesn't matter what you're doing, we need to raise the standard of what we accept in Oklahoma City. And can't do it overnight. You cannot go from here to here immediately. People, change is really difficult for people to accept. But if you do it gradually in all areas, eventually you'll kind of start to build the city that you want.
Right. It's, with the conservative philosophy in Idaho, it collides where you have too much government, but you're trying to protect someone's private investment in their property.
Yeah.
It's a constant tension there. So.
Yeah. No, I understand, and it's we dip into those areas all the time, and sometimes it's uneasy doing it. Recently, we had a historic theater that most people would say it was the ugliest building in town, but nonetheless, every building's got its followers, and so we had some investors who wanted to build an office tower, and so they went through all of the the boards and commissions necessary to demolish the building and take it out so the tower could be constructed. The demolish took place, and one of the chief occupants of this tower was going to be the electric company. Well, just recently, the electric company went for a rate increase before the Corporation Commission and had it denied. Well, they immediately stopped plans to build the building. And so now we've done the demolition, and the funded, we thought, plan to build the replacement is not happening, at least not immediately. And so that's one of those things you think, how did we let that happen? You know, regardless of the, you know, the public sentiment that that building wasn't special to most people, you just don't go tearing down buildings when you don't have anything, you know, to replace it. It's just not responsible. And we allowed that to happen. I hope that's a rare case. I can't think of another example where we kind of did that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of all of the MAPS projects, did your state constitution provide for the 51% approval, or was it the higher, and did you have to rewrite?
Yeah, his question is, the local sales tax option, is that in the Constitution, or was that voted in?
And the 51 versus the 2/3 that we have here in Idaho.
Yeah, it's in the Constitution. I think it was originally there. We have a very populist Constitution. As I understand it, Theodore Roosevelt was president when our Constitution was being designed and written. He's a very populist politician, and he kind of believed on people voting. And so to change taxation in Oklahoma, you almost always have to have a vote on it. And so that local sales tax option was always put in there, I believe. I think it's always been there. Now, raising it to 60% for school bond issues, I think that was a change to the state constitution that was done sometime that predated my involvement. But the 50%, I think, has always been.
Because we're faced with not only trying to put local option in place, but take it from 2/3 majority requirement to 50 plus 1 or 51%.
Yeah.
So it's a double barrel challenge that makes it even more relevant.
Yeah, I have an opinion on that. When I think constitutionally, I don't, and I use this example in Oklahoma when it takes 60% to pass a school bond issue. I don't understand how it's constitutional for 41% of the electorate to choose the property tax rate for the other 59%. I mean, how does a minority get to choose the tax rate? And that's the argument I've suggested. No one's ever given me a good answer, but nonetheless, we have this 60% threshold that some reach and some don't.
But you only need 41% to raise.
No, you need 50. But what I was saying was, if 41% could stop it, they're determining the tax rate for the 59% that wanted a different rate.
Right.
And that,
good point.
Yeah, that doesn't seem constitutional to me. It seems like one vote ought to be one vote. Yes? Do you understand? Okay.
Question in your airport, are you happy with that? How's that work in terms of, you're in between some major mega cities?
Yeah, his question is about our airport. We reinvested in the airport in about 2005, completed that construction in about 2008. So we have a very modern airport. It's one of the, it was in design when 9/11 happened, which benefited us because some of the new precautions. I think we were like the first airport to have some of the new design with some of the post 9/11 necessities. We are kind of a round hub. So Denver's a hub, Dallas is a hub, Houston's a hub, Chicago's a hub, and as a result, we're likely never to become a hub. We have direct flights, I think, to 25 cities or so, something similar to that. The city of Oklahoma City operates the airport for the rest of the community, and it's a basically runs as a nonprofit. It doesn't require general fund subsidization. It runs on its own. Anybody else? Yeah, in the back.
Do you know what the graduation is in your schools, or how did that play out?
Yeah, okay. I didn't really get, we improved the buildings, but what happened to the education that goes on inside? It's education in Oklahoma, you can make about any argument you want. We have pockets of success. Inside Oklahoma City, inside that urban district, we have 2 of the highest performing high schools in the country. We also have some of the lowest performing in the state, in the same district. So it's very inconsistent. Why should one kid seemingly get a much better education than another kid living, in one adjacent neighborhood? Yet that happens. We are very progressive and I think proud of our investment in pre-K. We were the largest school district in the country to have fully funded all-day pre-K. And we also do really well on career tech and higher ed. Our universities are numerous. We have 120,000 college students within an hour's drive of Oklahoma City. That's about almost 1 in 10 people. So we have large universities there. But where we fail is in teacher salaries and K through 12 in some districts. In some of our districts, mostly suburban, higher performing, and they outperform the state in general on graduation rates and other attainment measures. But that inconsistency is what bothers me the most. And so whatever take you want to make on Oklahoma education, you can probably make it. There's probably evidence to take any position you want to take on the quality of how we're doing. But overall, I think that the glaring neglect that we're trying to address in the current legislature is teacher salaries and trying to get them higher. We lose teachers to other states. And obviously that's going to affect the education of your kids. Anybody else? Okay.
So the projects you talked about all seem to be capital projects, building things. Has the city ever considered using local option sales tax to fund social issues, needs? One of the topics that's come up in Boise is the homeless situation, so funding affordable housing, that kind of thing. Has there been any social funding?
Yeah. His question is, have we ever used sales tax or local options for social issues to take care of social needs? We have not. And here's what I've noticed about the way Oklahoma City has evolved on all of those issues. It seems to me that our approach has been to try to create a pro-business environment with the hopes that philanthropy will be created and that our faith-based organizations and our nonprofits can help us with the social issues. My view is that government is not good at the social issues. If a person or a family has reached that intersection of mental illness or poverty or homelessness, generally they need an individual response or an individual attention. Government's not good at individual attention. We're good at a policy that everybody understands and can adhere to, like a speed limit. Whether you follow it or not, you understand it, and it's the same for everybody. Government's not good at solving individual problems. I think the nonprofits and the faith-based organizations are ultimately better equipped to try and deal with that. So it's a work in progress, but I think people have passed these sales taxes because they were capital projects. The problem with funding a social issue with a sales tax is I think you're going to have voters who are just concerned about how effective it's going to be, how the success is going to be measured. With the MAPS projects, we have basically met or exceeded the expectations on every project, or they wouldn't keep voting for it. With a social issue and trying to address it, I think it's going to be much harder to say we have successfully addressed that project, with that issue, with a higher level of tax. So I'm not suggesting that we've done it right and everybody else has done it wrong. I'm just suggesting that seems what we've done, and it's how we're dealing with it. And we have the same social issues that every other community is facing in those regards.
I would say that some of those investments, and Boise has partnered with the school district, with the after-school centers and libraries. Are there any matching of those capital projects with needs from the agencies to provide?
Yes, we have. We rely on nonprofits for a lot of those after-school programs, and helping on a lot of the pre-K that I mentioned. It is not all government funded. There's philanthropy involved in that all-day pre-K initiative too. So we're relying heavily on the private sector.
What is your average income with all the Bowen engineers?
Yeah, she's asking about average income, and I'm trying to remember. Let me give you a different statistic that spreads the same thing, because sometimes I get confused on what's an average income for a person and what's for a family and household and all that stuff. As I recall, our cost of living is 90% of the national average, and our wage in the county is like 108% of the national average. And what that should lead you to believe is that our housing prices are really low, and so you're not spending that much of your income on housing. And that discretionary income bubble, that 18% or whatever it is, I think that plays directly into the quality of life in the community, because if you have money in your pocket, your quality of life's better. It would be the same house, but if it costs you less, you have money in your pocket. And that allows you to go out to eat, or it allows you to buy tickets to a basketball game that you might not have had. And that is one of the main selling points we use when we're talking, outside the market. For instance, when Boeing moved those jobs from California and Seattle and Wichita, they flew me and some others to those communities to talk to the employees whose jobs were leaving. Boeing wants those employees to move too. And so they want a sales pitch. And so when I'm in Southern California and I'm showing them in a slide the type of house that they could afford, their jaws drop. They can live in a mansion, for what they're paying in Southern California. Suddenly moving to Oklahoma doesn't sound like such a bad idea. Their job's going anyway. And Boeing is hoping that that person will go with the job. And the expectation of how many people would move in those cities, we've always doubled the rate of people willing to relocate. Once we've had a chance to kind of talk to them. If we almost always exceed expectations, but that's partially because expectations are generally so low. God help us if anybody ever expects anything when they come to Oklahoma City. But generally, visitors that come there for the first time are, they're blown away because they didn't expect much. Didn't know what to expect, but didn't expect to see the things that they see.
Has healthcare or the medical communities, has that affected you at all? Have you had to deal with it much?
Yeah, you're talking about just
hospitals and just...
Yeah, her question is about healthcare in general. Well, we are kind of the epicenter of healthcare for the state of Oklahoma. We have large research going underway for diabetes and eyes, Dean McGee Eye Center, and also on cancer research. And so those are large job creators right there, kind of a research center and medical tourism that comes in for that. Like most states, we have a lot of healthcare needs that go unmet. We have a lot of people that are uninsured. So we deal with those types of situations. But for the most part, if you need health care and you live in the state of Oklahoma, chances are you're going to wind up in Oklahoma City. So we have the facilities. It's just paying for it is the issue for some people.
A huge thing for bigger cities is pro-franchises. I just wonder how the Thunder has played in politically and economically.
Yeah, his question is about our NBA experience. Well, when I was elected mayor, one of my first goals was to improve the brand of Oklahoma City. I felt like we had a wounded brand, and I came from television and a marketing background. And I looked at Oklahoma City and was explaining to people that we had allowed our brand to be identified by tragedy. If people said Oklahoma City, chances are they remember the bombed out building. That was probably the last time they thought about Oklahoma City. And because that tragedy took our name, Oklahoma City bombing, it took our brand with it. We also had a tornado in 1999. It was the Oklahoma City tornado. Well, so if that's people's image of Oklahoma City, that's not great for your economic development efforts. People might feel sorry for you, but they're probably not going to invest in your community. And so I felt like we have to do something to protect and improve our brand. And so I flew to New York and started visiting with Commissioner Stern and Commissioner Bettman about an NBA or NHL team. I was not getting very far. Hockey at that time was having a work stoppage. They just weren't really able to talk about relocating franchises. The NBA, Commissioner Stern basically told me, he goes, I don't have a franchise for you. I kept going back to see him, and he basically told me I could quit coming. What happened was Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. I'd already established a relationship with Commissioner Stern, and they needed a place to relocate the Hornets franchise, and so we got a chance to host them for 1 year after Hurricane Katrina. They made so much money in that 1 year, they didn't want to go back to New Orleans. The NBA gave them an all-star game for a second year in Oklahoma City, and again, we sold out every game again. And at that point, they felt like they had to go back to New Orleans. They had a lease. But we had gone from not being on the relocation list to now being at the top of the relocation list. Some of our business leaders bought the Sonics, committed to trying for a year to get an arena built in Seattle. When those efforts failed, they were free to move the franchise where they wanted, and people suspected if they got the chance to move the franchise, they would move them to Oklahoma City. And they did. At that time, we were kind of a proven market. But, and it's not an accident that it's called the Oklahoma City Thunder, not the Oklahoma Thunder. We were trying to improve our brand. And so more than anything, that's what that team brings for us. And it's very fulfilling for me to have our citizens come up and tell me anecdotes about, you know, they were in Istanbul, or they were in Montreal, or they were in, you know, in Africa, and someone found out where they were from, and they talked about the Thunder and Kevin Durant. You know, that's what people associate with it. So the NBA has this kind of worldwide stage, and you get a list of peer cities that you probably never justified, you know, having. You know, to a certain extent, a lot of America views a city based on who their sports teams play. You know, we were playing Amarillo and Little Rock and Wichita. Fine cities, all. I mean, I've visited all those cities. But, you know, that's who we were associated with. When we got to the NBA, now we play Chicago and New York and Los Angeles, and it's on Sports Center, and they're showing their names at the bottom of the screen. And it's just a whole new identity for your community. And the reason that's important is when your large companies are trying to attract talent from the East and West Coast, they at least have some sort of identity to Oklahoma City. You are culturally relevant, you know, when that happens. And, you know, to this next generation that's coming up that has lived on Sports Center and MTV, being culturally relevant to the rest of the world is an important identity for wherever they choose to live. You got to have some sort of inroads to that media mentality. And so that's what the Thunder provides for us. And the fact that they win is a bonus. Just having a team is incredible for our city's success story. But the fact that they're, you know, perhaps one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league is, you know, like I say, that's just a bonus that we're grateful to have. Yes.
How much development did you see around the stadium after you built that?
Yeah, well, it's in the heart of Bricktown, and just to the south is a development that has a lot of retail, you know, multiplex movie theater, housing, and the corporate headquarters of Sonic just across the street. So quite a bit. Yeah. And there's a parking lot just next to it, a surface parking lot that we own, that we kind of control. Something special needs to go there, but we need parking in Bricktown too. So eventually that will have a higher use than it does today.
I just want to trash talk a little bit. Our
Okay.
D-League team has a better record than the Oklahoma City. But we play in March, so I'll be watching that game.
I hate that. Yeah, we're very proud of our Blues, the Oklahoma City Blue, and the D-League team. Yeah.
So we feel better about it.
Okay. So when do you play in Oklahoma City? I'll try to go to that game. Yes.
So how do you translate your vision down through your organizations to the staff level?
Yeah, because I have it's called the weak mayor form of government. So I have a city manager who handles the day-to-day operations. But, you know, the city staff is aware of what I'm saying and talking about, you know, through the media or in meetings. And so, yeah, I try to establish a culture of where we're headed, but I let the city staff kind of direct how we get there. I mean, that's their job and their goal, and it's what they're good at. And so the way our system kind of works is that if the city manager is doing his or her job, in our case, it's a very competent guy that's been running our city for 17 years. He's handling the day-to-day so that the mayor and council can kind of be looking out on the horizon and be worried about what's happening down the line. And occasionally we'll get a compliment. And what I'll say is that if you come into our city and you think things are going well, in our system you should ask, who's the city manager today and who was the mayor and council 10 years ago? Because they probably had more to do with what you see than the mayor and council today. Because it really does take a long time for our effect, the leadership effect, to kind of show perk up its head. I'll let you go. But thank you so much, and I'm there for you if y'all need any other advice or want to talk through an idea. Then feel free to call on me. Thanks very much.